In 2025, a paper published in Progress in Brain Research, one of neuroscience's most respected journals, made a remarkable claim. Ancient pranayama breathing practices, first described in the Rig Veda around 1500 BCE, operate through the same mechanisms as transcranial magnetic stimulation, a medical device that costs tens of thousands of dollars and requires clinical administration. The ancient version? Free, self-directed, available to anyone who learns to breathe correctly. The tradition didn't wait for the journal. It's been teaching this for 3,500 years. But here's what matters more than the science catching up. If the breath works the way ancient practitioners said it works, if the nervous system responds the way the Yoga Sutras described, then everything else they mapped might be just as accurate. That sensing you have, that there's more available to you than your current daily life? That's not wishful thinking. That's an accurate read of a system that's been mapped in extraordinary detail. Let's look at the evidence. Long before laboratories existed, ancient practitioners were running systematic experiments on the human nervous system. They didn't call it the vagus nerve. They called it prana, the life force that moves through channels called nadis, regulated by the breath, and directly tied to the state of the mind. The Rig Veda, composed around 1500 BCE, contains the first written references to pranayama, breath control as a technology for shifting consciousness. The Upanishads, written between 800 and 500 BCE, elaborated this into a systematic science. They described specific ratios of inhalation, retention, and exhalation that produced specific states, not vague spiritual states, measurable shifts in attention, emotion, and physiological arousal. The Bhagavad Gita, composed around 200 BCE, contains an instruction from Krishna that's strikingly precise for its era. Equalizing the flow of incoming and outgoing breath in the nostrils, controlling the senses, mind and intellect, the practitioner becomes free from desire, fear, and anger, leading to inner peace. The Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, 400 CE, then formalized pranayama as the fourth of the 8 limbs, not optional, not decorative, structurally essential, a prerequisite for meditative depth. And this wasn't one tradition in isolation. Across cultures, across continents, ancient practitioners arrived at the same discovery. In ancient Greece, pneuma. In Hebrew, ruach. In Latin, spiritus. In Chinese, chai. In Japanese, kai. Different languages, different civilizations, same mapped reality. That the breath is a direct lever on the nervous system, and that learning to consciously operate that lever changes everything downstream. They weren't speaking metaphorically. They were documenting functional technology. The Taoist masters developed specific breathing practices to cultivate jing, qi, and shen, essence, energy, and spirit, a threefold model of human energetics that maps remarkably closely to what we now understand as the relationship between the autonomic nervous system, the endocrine system, and the central nervous system. These practitioners weren't accessing this knowledge through revelation. They were accessing it through repetition, observation, and refinement across generations. Inner science, systematic, empirical, just using different instruments. Now let's talk about what happens when modern science points its instruments at these ancient claims. Start with the breath itself. A 2025 paper in Progress in Brain Research analyzed pranayama and found that its mechanisms, vagus nerve stimulation, autonomic regulation, hemispheric shifts in brain dominance, are functionally equivalent to transcranial magnetic stimulation and vagus nerve stimulation devices used in clinical neurology. The ancient technology predates the clinical technology by 3,500 years and requires no equipment, no prescription, and no appointment. The vagus nerve is the key. It's the longest nerve in the body, running from the brainstem through the neck, heart, lungs, and digestive system. Approximately 80% of its fibers are afferent, meaning they carry signals up to the brain rather than down to the body. When you breathe slowly and deliberately, you stimulate the vagus nerve directly. That stimulation travels upward and changes activity in the amygdala, the hippocampus, the anterior cingulate cortex, and the prefrontal cortex, the regions governing emotional regulation, memory, decision-making, and fear response. Ancient practitioners called this becoming free from desire, fear, and anger. Neuroscience calls it parasympathetic upregulation and prefrontal cortex enhancement. A 2025 meta-analysis in Stress and Health reviewed 465 studies on breathwork and found that slow, diaphragmatic nasal breathing at approximately 6 breaths per minute consistently improved HRV, reduced cortisol, decreased inflammation, and enhanced emotional regulation. These improvements appeared across healthy individuals, clinical populations, and even trauma-affected populations. And critically, measurable effects appeared in sessions as short as 2 minutes. Heart rate variability, HRV, is now medicine's most precise, non-invasive measure of nervous system health. High HRV indicates a system capable of flexible, adaptive response. Low HRV is associated with cardiovascular disease, anxiety, depression, and cognitive decline. Ancient practitioners built entire systems around optimizing this. They just called it something different. On the meditation side, a 2025 review published in Imaging Neuroscience by researchers at Harvard, MIT, and the University of Melbourne synthesized findings on long-term meditators. They found increased cognitive sensory integration, reduced pain reactivity, greater emotional neutrality, and what they described as malleable self-boundaries, the very state ancient texts call the entry to non-dual awareness. The prefrontal cortex thickens with sustained practice. The amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, reduces in reactivity. The default mode network, responsible for the anxious, self-referential inner narrator most people experience as the mind, quiets and decoheres. Neural pathways reorganize around a different center of gravity. This is what the ancient traditions promised. This is what the studies are now confirming. The gap between what they knew and what we're proving isn't a gap in their understanding. It's a gap in our instruments. They got there first, by a long margin. So why does this matter to you right now? Because you've sensed something this research is pointing at. There's a quality of presence that's different from your ordinary daily state. You've touched it, maybe briefly, maybe in a moment of stillness in nature, maybe in the middle of a run or a surf or an early morning before the day's noise arrived. A state where you felt more capable, more clear, more real than usual. Ancient practitioners didn't treat that as a happy accident. They treated it as evidence. Evidence that a different and more functional state of being is available, reproducibly, systematically, and that the gap between that state and your ordinary baseline is a training problem, not a fate. The tradition teaches that what you sense as more is actually closer to baseline. The anxious, contracted, reactive state most people inhabit as normal, the low HRV, the amygdala-dominant processing, the default mode network running on loop. That's the departure from baseline, not the destination. This matters enormously because it reframes the entire project. You're not trying to become something you're not. You're not chasing a state that exists outside yourself. You're learning to operate a system that's already inside you, a system that ancient practitioners mapped in extraordinary detail, and that modern science is now confirming works exactly as described. The sensing that there's more? Trust it. It's accurate. What's less certain, for most people, is the path. Because the path requires specific knowledge, not general wellness advice, not motivational content. The actual technology of regulation that the ancient traditions preserved and transmitted across thousands of years. That's what Fiboprana exists to transmit. Here's one piece of that technology, ancient in origin, now extensively validated. It comes from Pranayama tradition. The practice is called Nadi Shodhana in Sanskrit, alternate nostril breathing. The name means channel purification. The tradition teaches it balances the two primary energy channels, calms the nervous system, and prepares the mind for meditation. Modern research describes it as activating hemispheric balance, stimulating the vagus nerve, and shifting autonomic state from sympathetic to parasympathetic dominance. Same practice, same mechanism, different vocabularies. Here's the core technique. Sit upright. Take your right hand and bring your index and middle fingers to rest between your eyebrows, or fold them into your palm. You'll use your right thumb to close your right nostril, and your right ring finger to close your left. Close your right nostril with your thumb. Inhale slowly through the left nostril for a count of 4. Hold gently for a count of 4. Release the right, close the left with your ring finger. Exhale slowly through the right for a count of 8. Now inhale through the right for a count of 4. Hold for 4. Switch. Exhale through the left for 8. That's one complete cycle. The extended exhale is not arbitrary. The 2025 meta-analysis confirmed that exhale-dominant breathing produces the most significant increases in HRV and parasympathetic activation. Ancient practitioners arrived at this ratio through empirical observation. They were right. Do 5 to 8 cycles, less than 5 minutes. Notice the shift. The tradition teaches that consistent daily practice of this technique, not occasional daily, begins to reorganize the baseline. The state you touched briefly becomes more accessible. Your resting HRV rises. Your amygdala reactivity decreases. Your prefrontal cortex, over time, physically thickens. This is not metaphor. This is the neuroplasticity the research describes, produced by an ancient practice that's been reliably transmitted for 3,500 years. The ancient practitioners weren't waiting for neuroscience to validate them. They had 3,500 years of experimental results. But now that science has arrived, you don't have to take it on faith. What we've covered today is a small window into a much larger body of verified knowledge. The ancient traditions, yoga, Taoism, Buddhism, and their equivalents across every major culture, weren't collections of folklore. They were systematic investigations of the human system, conducted over thousands of years, refined across generations of practitioners, and transmitted with extraordinary care, precisely because the practitioners knew what they had. They had a map of human potential that modern science is now, slowly and haltingly, confirming in detail. That sensing you carry, that you're capable of more than your current daily life reflects, isn't spiritual fantasy. It's an accurate read of a system that has enormous untapped capacity. And the path into that capacity has been documented. If this resonates, if you felt what we're pointing at and want to understand the map more fully, there's a guide below. It's called Why You Feel Called to Something More. It's free, because this knowledge was never meant to be hoarded. Ancient practitioners transmitted it freely across generations. We're doing the same. The link is below. We'll see you in the next video.